Hey y'all, it's your Uncle Greg. Check out my two appearances on Fox 26 Houston's ISIAH Factor Uncensored, coming up right now.
The ISIAH Factor Uncensored starts right now.
And welcome to the Factor Uncensored. Our minds are still on Uvalde tonight. A viral video shows just how desperate and frustrated parents were that day. You can hear them beg and plead with officers to rush inside of that elementary school.
You know that they're kids, right? They're little kids. They don't know how to defend themselves. 6-year-old kids in there. They don't know how to defend themselves from a shooter.
Now, the investigation is still underway, but there are now confirmed reports that from 40 minutes to an hour, law enforcement officers didn't engage the suspect at the school until backup arrived. That's even despite them knowing the shooter was inside the building and armed. Clearly, that was enough time for the suspect to shoot and tragically kill 19 children and 2 teachers in that school. My guests have years of law enforcement experience. They told me if those reports are true, which we're now getting confirmed, officers dropped the ball.
Chief Jimmy Dodson, your thoughts on this as a former law enforcement officer?
Well, if that is accurate, and that timeline that they have discussed is accurate, in my professional opinion, it's unacceptable. There's no reason why there couldn't have been some type of engagement. After Columbine, we were trained that the rules of engagement is the first officer on the scene, you go in immediately. You don't wait for backup. Your job is to go in and try to disable the shooter, even if it means you put your life in danger. Because the more you wait, the longer you wait, the more bodies are going to pile up. And I think that could have been the case. But again, I wasn't there. I don't want a Monday morning quarterback, but based upon what the eyewitnesses on the scene stated, that is unacceptable if that was the case.
Is it possible, Chief, that no matter how well trained you are, how many skills you get, how many drills you run through, when you're actually dealing with a situation like this, an active shooter, is there a possibility you forget some of that? You freeze up. You're wondering about your loved ones. And I know many of the law enforcement officers had kids in that school. Is it possible you could just forget what you've learned and just get caught up in the moment, not only as a law enforcement officer, but as a parent as well?
Well, humanly speaking, yes, but that's why you train. You train to respond so that when that time comes, you don't have to rely on your emotions. You rely on your training. And that's the reason why we constantly make sure that our officers are trained properly over and over and over again for situations such as this. Now, there's going to be some situations you'll never be trained for. But between your training and your instinct when it kicks in, the first thing is to save lives, no matter what the cost is. You have to go in and save lives.
Gregory Dupree, former Houston police officer, now security and safety consultant. If that timeline is accurate, 40 minutes to an hour before engaging and stopping the shooter, we know he tried to get in the front of the school, ran into the back of the school. There were officers already out there. Your thoughts on that, if that timeline is accurate?
Okay, and that's a big if. And you're right, Isaiah. If that timeline is accurate, I agree wholeheartedly with what the chief said. As you know, I was also a police officer in Aurora, Colorado at the time Columbine took place. And as a matter of fact, we were one of the agencies that was called out to assist. But as a result, and what was interesting about Columbine is that numerous agencies responded, and they did not wait for a coordinated effort. Some of those agencies took it upon themselves to enter the school because some of these officers had kids in the school. So they didn't take the time to wait, for some type of strategy to be put in place to go and enter the school. Now, as a result, we had a law enforcement briefing for all the agencies that were involved in Columbine. And one of the things that came out of it was just what the chief said. We changed from a static point or static strategy where we would just sit and wait on the suspect or wait for SWAT to come in and handle the situation. And we switched to a dynamic strategy or dynamic entry. This is how equipping officers with AR-15s in the vehicle came about. And they told us, from now, if you run up on a situation like that, don't wait for anybody. Once you have 2 officers, you make entry. And they gave us the equipment to do so.
But Chief, when you also look at the video of the family members, the parents trying to get into the school, you do have to have officers out there, though, to set the perimeter, to make sure everyone doesn't just run into that school, right?
Well, yeah, but only if you've already got officers inside the school.
Got it.
Have officers inside the school. What good does it do to set up a parameter? Because every second that you allow that shooter in there, there's lives that are being taken. So the parameter could have easily been abolished and went inside the school, or deputize somebody to say, keep them from backing out, coming in, because we're going in and we don't want any more innocent lives lost. So again, based upon what I saw, and again, I don't want to be a Monday morning quarterback, but when you see that and you see officers that are there keeping the citizens back and nobody's engaged in the process of the shooter. Now, again, I don't know if that's the case or not, but if it is the case, then there's got to be some explaining done.
And Gregory Dupree, once again, one of the things we also heard, and they're reporting, and we know this is pretty factual, that the shooter was taken out by a Border Patrol agent. Border Patrol, I think, was stationed 40 miles away. What does that tell you? And I'm not sure if that agent was stationed at the time 40 miles away, but we know they got there after many of the local law enforcement arrived on the scene. But what does that tell you that a Border Patrol agent moved in and took out the shooter?
That tells me just what the chief alluded to earlier, that officer or Border Patrol officers, they acted on their instinct, because Border Patrol is not trained to make entry into schools or any type of building like that. So they took it upon themselves to to enter that school and stop the threat, because they knew how dangerous it would be to allow that suspect to continue to do what he was doing. So that's when your instincts and your training kick in and you do what you have to do.
I am livid about what happened. I was on this very stage 2 days ago, and I was telling the public information that had been told to me. As everybody has learned, the information that I was given turned out in part to be inaccurate, and I'm absolutely livid.
As you should be, Governor. New information tonight about the Uvalde shooting has left people mad as hell. Even Governor Greg Abbott, you just saw there. Texas DPS Director Stephen McCraw admitted officers waited too long to enter Robb Elementary School. It's clear now officers took their time to breach the room where the killer was, waiting 47 minutes outside of the classroom until they got a key from a janitor.
For the benefit of hindsight, where I'm sitting now, of course it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision, period. There was no excuse for that. But again, I wasn't there, but I'm just telling you, from what we know, that we believe there should have been an entry at that as soon as you can. A decision was made that this was a barricaded subject situation. There was time to retrieve the keys and wait for a tactical team with the equipment to go ahead and breach the door and take on the subject at that point. That was the decision, that was the thought process at that particular point in time.
Now just remember, they saw an armed man go into a classroom filled with students with a gun, with an AR-15, 2 AR-15s. And he stayed in there for an hour. Now, the officers who chose to do nothing are under a lot of scrutiny. Many people wondering why they decided to wait. I spoke to current and former law enforcement officials about how badly these children were failed.
Chief Dotson, your thoughts on this now?
Well, unfortunately, I have to agree with you, Isaiah, because there really was a failure on the part of law enforcement, unfortunately. It appears that there was no particular command as far as who's going to do what and when and where and how. You had several agencies. I don't know if these agencies had ever trained together or not. And if they had, then it's unexplainable why they did not act immediately when they realized that there was a shooter, an active shooter in place. And if they had not trained, then you have to ask the question, why not? Because you have so many law enforcement agencies in that jurisdiction, and there has to be someone who is going to be able to take charge of the situation when it happens. And so it needs to be someone who has gone through the training, who have trained with those particular group of officers to be able to make the decision that they need to make when they needed to make it. So I'm embarrassed to say that it definitely appears to have been a failure on the part of law enforcement.
And Greg, let me ask you, how embarrassing is it, this type of response to an 18-year-old shooter with an AR-15, and we have a long list of law enforcement agencies out there, and he's able to stay in a classroom for at least an hour, shoot and kill 19 children and 2 teachers. How embarrassing is that? How horrible is that?
It's extremely embarrassing, Isaiah, not just to that agency, but to the law enforcement community across America. And the sad thing is that the confidence in that agency is probably at a level of 0 right now within that community. And they're going to always be questioned going forward. And not just them. People are going to question the actions of every law enforcement agency that gets involved in this type of situation that might be doing the best job that they can. But because of this incident, they're going to be looked at and scrutinized at a higher level than ever before, and then criticized in that matter as well.
Constable Smith, are you surprised at just how bad this response was by their own admission?
Well, when I think about the Sandy Hook, and we should have all learned something from the Sandy Hook. We heard shots going off for a while, and everybody was just standing still hearing shots. Nobody decided to breach. We got to breach this situation, and we got to neutralize this shooter as soon as possible. But the main objective is to neutralize this shooter.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, Chief Dotson, were you at all shocked or surprised yesterday when a DPS spokesperson said, well, if our guys would have gone in and breached the classroom and got inside with the shooter, they would have been shot?
Utterly, not only surprised, but utterly disappointed. I mean, when we sign on to do this job, we know without a shadow of a doubt, your life is going to be on the line. You're going to be called upon to sacrifice your life if necessary. And for that statement to have come out, I don't know how much confidence the community is going to have in that law enforcement or those law enforcement agencies. And ultimately, perhaps it may taint law enforcement as a whole, because, we're supposed to be the good guys, and the good guys are the ones that's putting their life on the line. And if you're not willing to put your life on the line, you should not have raised your hand and swear to the Constitution of the United States of America to uphold the law and protect the citizens of that community with your life if you have to.
And Greg, what happened to all the drills, all the practice that they've had in the past to deal with an active shooter, and it just went out the window?
And you're right. That's if they actually had some type of high-level training for incidents like this. You also have to consider, just because you have the training doesn't mean you have the courage to act on that training when you're placed in a situation like this. I've encountered officers in the law enforcement community. They're well trained, but when a situation arose, they panic. It's a small number, but I've never seen it on the scale this large. I got a message today from someone that said, well, you have to consider that these guys were outgunned. And every time a law enforcement officer steps out of the house, we're outgunned. We knew that when we picked up the badge. And so it's just like the chief says, when we took that oath, we were prepared to give up our life to save others. And you didn't see that in at that school.
Still to come, no one can say or disagree that something should have been done to help those children and their teachers. Our discussion continues in 90 seconds here on The Factor Uncensored. Stay with us.
It is our duty. It is our duty to do it. You know, you can't, once you're in a situation like that, you got to forget about yourself and you got to think about those children.
And welcome back. Uvalde is a quiet town almost 5 hours away from Houston. Their officers face their biggest threat ever, a bloodthirsty gunman. Now, their fear in the situation may have been a human response, but their decision to wait while the killer locked himself in that classroom with the children and teacher cost lives. I talked about that issue with my guests.
Constable Smith, do you think fear played a part in this situation where the law enforcement officers didn't go in, or was it more confusion, or a little bit of both?
Definite fear played a part in this. That's why Article 1 says law enforcement officials shall at all times fulfill the duty imposed upon them by the law, and serving the community and protecting all persons against illegal acts. And this is the thing that we must understand. It is our duty. It is our duty to do it. You know, you can't, once you're in a situation like that, you got to forget about yourself and you got to think about those children, the children. The same thing that would happen to me as a father. If I know somebody is in my house and shooting at my kids, I'm going to take everything I got to get in my house and make sure that I neutralize the person that's out there to damage my children.
And Chief Dodson, how do we rectify this? How do we fix this problem down the road? Can it be fixed if there's always that human element involved?
Well, yeah, you do the best you can. And as far as fixing it, you got to start where the problems are. And the problems are going to be here is a proliferation of guns, mental health, and the lack of our political leaders to have the political will to make decisions to keep the community safe. You got to start with someplace. And if you're not willing to do it, then you need to give the job up and let somebody else who's willing to do it. Just like law enforcement officers. If you're not willing to put your life on the line, then get out of the profession and get another profession. Politicians, if you're not willing to make the tough, hard decisions, even if it means that you may lose your position, then give it up and let somebody else make the decision, because life is too short. And I'm going to tell you right now, I dread hearing those 911 tapes when they come out and you hear those kids crying and begging for help. And then we're standing, and I say we, because I got 47 years invested in law enforcement, standing out there in the hallway waiting for somebody else. Hell, that somebody else is you, man. You got to go in there. Yeah. You know, every day when you leave home and put that uniform on, you may not come back. You know that. When I hear those 911 tapes, when they come out, those poor kids begging and crying for help. And if that don't impact you, Mr. Politician, if that don't impact you, Mr. Decision Maker, Mr. Police Chief, Mr. Sergeant on the line, whoever you are, Mr. Gun Licensed person, if that don't impact you, then I have to question your heart. Mm-hmm. Question whether or not you have a heart.
You're absolutely right, Chief. We want to thank you all for joining us here on The Factor Uncensored. We have a lot of work to do. Thank you guys for joining us tonight.